fans of Horus Heresy, the Legion of Cheese, and thinking about all those obscure units from the Heresy novels. Thank you very much for joining me, and Jay as well, from Legion of Two, for the third episode of Legion of Cheese. How are you doing today, Jay?
I'm all right, Leaky. How's yourself? It's good to be back. Thank you.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. I am good. We were just lamenting over Tuesdays, weren't we?
Yes.
A few moments ago, and came to the conclusion that your Tuesdays are the day to be off sick, whereas mine is a bit of a roll of the dice. So yes, but we're good, aren't we? And we are back to talk about some heresy. So, yes, and following on from our last Legion of Cheese episode, where we talked about the Mystery Army, we thought we would be a bit less speculative this time and have a discussion about things that are perhaps familiar within the setting of the Horus Heresy, specifically Astartes units, but don't yet have official rules in game, but could easily become so. And what inspired us here was the recent series, I say recent, they've been running for over a year now, of articles from Games Workshop, the Exemplary Battle series. And one of the things he did, as well as providing scenarios and background, is they introduced new units. And they were sort of like flavors of existing Legion units, weren't they?
Yeah, it's a nice way for Legions to get something a bit extra that does not require Forge World minis. Because you could easily kit bash these themselves. Let's take an example from Exemplary Battles Book 1 that got released a couple of weeks ago with the battle group, the Red Hand Destroyers. Mm-hmm. The only difference between the Red Hand Destroyers and a standard destroyer is they have the World Eaters logo and a red hand. You don't really need a brand new mini for that. You can easily just make that yourself. But that small little stat line, couple of rules, just really expands the World Eaters Legion.
Yes, absolutely.
Just includes a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are I was just thinking of a couple of other examples. We had was it the Nemesis Destroyers from the Ultramarines?
Yes, they got stats as well, yeah.
Yeah, which was kind of an interesting idea that it took the concept of the Destroyer Squad, but armed more like a tactical or even Seeker Squad, which I quite liked. And then there is, just looking at the one, they've branched out into some other areas as well. Was it they did the Bodyguard Terminator unit from what's his name? Perturabo.
Yes, the Dominators.
The Dominators, yes. Yeah, and as with all these units, they've all got some connections to stories, and a lot of short stories that have come before, and some of the mainline novels, and they've turned them into gaming units that are designed to be painted up specifically based on an existing set of models, or for the more adventurous modeler, kit bash some miniatures. And some of these are quite fancy, actually, like the Atramentar Terminators of the Night Lords. They're quite interesting conversions, taking pieces of the Contekar Terminators and combining them with the regular plastic Tartaros. So some quite adventurous kit bashing there.
Yeah, no, they were nice little conversions to see. And I think, personally, that's what I quite like about the Exemplary Battles, is when they're doing each one of those little PDFs, you'll see a couple of people who've probably been requested to make these units or may have made them pre-existing, and they've taken some nice snaps of them, and none of them look the same, which is quite nice because there's obviously different people's interpretations, and I suppose until they get narrowed down into that lovely 2D render that we see in the old Black Heresy books of like the Marines standing at attention, you don't really know what they look like. A prime example would be the Dominators. I've seen a lot of people convert those using the Tyrant Siege Terminators, and a lot of people thought, well, they shouldn't be that ornate. Maybe they're in disfavor. They would have basic cataphracty. And, some people have hybridized them. But now that we have a 3D or a sort of 2D render in the Exemplary Battles book, we know...
Well, it's just in a suggestion. Yeah, people should never treat the heresy as a historical setting. It's an example of a Dominator. It is not...
Hold on.
Don't get me started.
You're saying it's not a heresy or it's not a historical
session.
game?
debating that point. I mean, I suppose, right. Okay, let me give an answer that is all things to all people. The heresy can be a historical setting if you want your heresy to be that way. Yeah. There is definitely a way to do it if that's what you like. However, that is not the intention in its totality of the game designers. The heresy, it's a broad framework in which you can create armies. If you want to go down the path of using artwork from publications and following that very closely, you can do. If you want to create something outlandish and weird that sort of fits within the concepts of what the setting allows, so for example, the Black Shields, you can do so. Yeah. Anyway, perhaps I shouldn't say anything else on that now because that's a different episode. But talk about different episodes. The units that we're going to talk about today, though, we're not just doing this ad lib. As we like to do on Legion of Cheese, we have planned this, haven't we? And we've put some forethought into this.
Oh, yeah. When we originally brainstormed this concept, we'd actually come up with, 8 or 10 units that, to our knowledge, so far have not received any stats. And we sort of, not the cream of the crop, but a nice mixture of Imperial and Trader for this iteration. And we're only going to do a couple. And then if we get the opportunity, if we want to do another episode, we'll do the rest, And you never know, by the time we actually maybe get part 2 out, half of them could have stats by then, because there could be
another. That sounds like a challenge to say, can we get a second episode of this out before Forge World can publish 2 or 3 exemplary battles? I have a feeling even at our production rate, we're going to win that.
Don't speak too soon, because we're recording this on a Tuesday. Normally they would drop those PDFs on a Wednesday or Thursday. So see if tomorrow, if one of these drop with one of the units we've talked about before the editing process is done, you will hear the scream.
I'll have to record
all the way from where you're sitting to where I'm
preface to this episode where I say this was recorded on Tuesday. Honest, before this got announced officially. Honest. You can trust us. So that's a basic idea, isn't it? We've talked about units in the background that have some mention in the story to the point where we understand what they are, and there's a bit of background and history to them, but they've not been given official rules. But we think these are units that existed in number, so it would make sense if they had their own rules to be a tabletop force, wouldn't it? That's a basic premise, and we've got a number. So
definitely.
I think there's some quite good ones in here. There's even a funny one, isn't there? Which is almost unheard of in the Age of Darkness.
See, well, I suppose the argument there is we would find it amusing for the fans who really enjoy this unit. For all intents and purposes, we're taking out their sacred animal and shooting it in the back of the head.
We will see what people have to say in the comments about this. Which nicely segues us into the first unit, which is
the World Eaters Bodyguard.
The Devourers.
The Devourers.
So what are the Devourers? So let me start setting the scene. So the Devourers are the Terminator elite bodyguard of the 12th Legion, the World Eaters. Terminator elite bodyguards are a common feature. All legions have them. Not all legions have named units as Terminator elite bodyguards, but the concepts are all there. And one of the things the Bodyguard Elite do, one of their primary functions is to accompany the Primarch into battle. A couple of obvious examples would be the Empress Children's Phoenix Guard and the Iron Hands Morlocks.
Yeah. And to a lesser extent, before they were put into disfavor, the Iron Warriors dominated. Which is
kind of a bit similar to the Devourers, isn't it? Because the Devourers, they're almost a bit comical, aren't they? Because...
yeah, they're the bodyguard of a guy who basically doesn't need or want a bodyguard, and because of his cranial implants, by the time they've looked around and realized where he's gone, he's halfway essentially across the battlefield, and because he obviously is a Primarch, Angron, even regardless of the armor he's in, he moves extremely quickly. But these guys are in Cataphractolate. They're not the quickest on the planet. So, by the time they've reached where he was a minute ago, he's already slaughtered everybody and then moved off to some other location. So they're basically playing a game of keep away, unofficially, keep away from the Primarch, or, trying to catch up to the Primarch, which is quite unfortunate considering most legions, if not all legions, would consider being the bodyguard
Absolutely,
to your
yes.
Primarch.
Yeah, I
the
mean, and
greatest
those two
honor
examples I gave
imaginable.
earlier, the Phoenix Guard
Yeah.
and the Morlocks, are both highly prestigious and honoured postings within those respective legions, aren't they? But for the Devoured, I guess it sort of epitomises Angron's attitude towards his legion, isn't it? He kind of acknowledges they're there, and he leads them in campaigns because he knows nothing else to do, but he doesn't care about them.
No, he really doesn't, unfortunately. So, I mean, that's the main part. I would sort of see that interpretation of Angron is in the Primarch story about him, Angron, Lord of the Red Sands, where he ends up, remember, going away for 2 whole years during the Crusade, and Karn has to find him. And he's just like, I don't want any of you. I don't care about any of you.
Yeah.
I cared about the people I fought with on New Syria. You're all just pale imitations, and you're all so desperately needy. Even he can see that there's
that
this
drives him nuts,
underlying
doesn't it?
urge to please.
And drives him nuts even more because of the Butcher's Nails. And of course, when Garland Serlac finally figures out how to make working Butcher's Nails, then perhaps for the first time, he's like, I don't know if Angron necessarily likes his legion, but he perhaps feels he can relate to them on a personal level in a way that means something to him.
At least for a little while, because I think even he would get bored after a while of their attempt to please. They all got the Butcher's Nails, but even he'd be like, you know what?
He's like, okay, so now at least you know how miserable my existence is.
That's enough.
So stop bothering me now. I want to be angry in my dark cave. But so the Devoured, they're kind of this unit that, ceremonially speaking, are equipped in cataphractii armour, which it's very tough, has formidable weapons, but you can't run in it, and it's slower than normal marine armours.
No.
And they're coupled with a Primarch who is, in a way, perhaps the fastest and swiftest moving on the battlefield, with the possible exception of Sanguinius on account of his wings. Angron is just going to take off and get into the thick of it. And he just leaves his guys behind, doesn't he?
Yeah. No matter where they are. It's mentioned a few times in Betrayer, I believe, but there's definitely one segment, I think, where they're hitting Armatura, where they specifically say, like I think it was like Kargos was speaking to Karn, and he was like, "Where's the Primarch?" And Karn was like, "I don't know, but there's the Devourers." As if to say, he used to be standing there, so it's like, but he's gone somewhere else now.
We might be able to figure out where Angron's going.
They must be expert trackers. Like, it's not a skill that any of them thought they'd ever need, because they're not Raven Guard, they're not stalky, they're not stealthy, but they must be expert trackers. Look for the giant, size 20 foot.
I mean, I don't even know
there's
if
the
they need
Primarch.
to be that good at
We're
tracking,
going that way.
but they just need to be. They need to be masters of moving quickly in cataphractii. And they feature in a few stories, don't they? I mean, they feature in Betrayer a few times.
Yeah, they're also in the Eightfold Path, which was a little short story that originally came out as a Black Library Christmas audio, like 10-minute audio story, that then got put into book form for the compendium Legacies of Betrayal. And that was the story about Karn really beginning to understand the concept of the Eightfold Path, because at this point in time, Angron has transformed into the Demon Prince, and he's in the bowels of the Conqueror. And at this point in time, Karn is in a blood duel with a guy called Borok, I believe. And it's only meant to go to first blood. But Karn can hear Angron screaming, and that rage that he can sort of feel deep down in his soul. And he goes into that haze that he goes into. They mention it a lot in the audio story Chosen of Khorne, where it's almost like he just switches his brain off, another person comes out, and he wakes up, almost like he blacks out and then wakes up.
Quite a few times in Betrayer, doesn't it? Where he gets consumed by the Butcher's Nails.
Yeah. And in this story, when he blacks out and wakes up, he's actually killed the Devourer.
Yeah.
And he wasn't meant to, because it was only meant to go to first blood. And one of his adjutants, I think it might have been Kargos again, the apothecary of his command squad, comes up and goes, congratulations, Karn, well done. A bit like the Necromunders from the Chronicles of Riddick, you keep what you kill, so you get to be promoted to be a devourer.
And
he basically just says politely,
not happening. Yeah. So those are the devourers. So that's a bit of background on them. What about as an in-game unit then?
As an in-game unit, I would say that, while normally they would be a sort of a HQ bodyguard unit, I would say they'd probably be better as a separate elite's choice. And I would personally make one of their special rules a bit of a running gag that they're meant to be a bodyguard, but they're really not. And that gives them a bit of a chip on their shoulder, shall we say, that they can't complete their duty. So they're actually even more angry than the angriest world leader. But what would you think? Do you think they would be better as a HQ option, as a complement, or an elite choice? Or what's your thoughts?
I would make them a bit like some units where you can have them as a HQ bodyguard choice. So let me think. Varen Ashodon, he can take a Reaver squad as a bodyguard. So for these guys, right, if you have Angron on the field and you buy these guys, they have to start off attached to him as a unit, yeah? At which point, though, Angron can immediately do whatever he wants.
So he immediately detaches and they go left, he goes right.
But it means they always have to deploy alongside the Primarch. So I would have that rule in. I mean, I would have them as weapon skill 5 Terminators, so they are kind of Terminator elite grade, because these are world eaters after all. But otherwise, I'd have them as fairly standard kit. I don't know if there's any real Terminator grade weaponry that world eaters have. You could perhaps give them the option of taking like 2 power axes rather than having one power weapon and a firearm.
That's quite a cool way to think about it, because that's almost like attempting to emulate the Primarch. Because depending on the way you're running Angron's mini,
so even more lenient to that. We're trying to please element and still not succeeding. So I think I'll do them that way. So elite unit, you can have up to 10. If you have Angron in the army, at least the largest squad has to start attached to Angron. But Angron can immediately ignore being in the unit and just run off. Chances are, though,
here's a
because Cataphracti can't run in Age of Darkness, they'll soon find themselves trailing his dust.
What about their sergeant? Would you make him a sort of mini Centurion? Or would you keep him just basically a bog standard Terminator sergeant? Because I get the feeling that they would need an aspect of, because they always get left in the dust, they would have a bit of autonomy. Their leader would have a bit more of nous.
If you're going to do these as weapon skill 5 Terminators anyway, they're almost as good as Centurions as it is. And then the sergeant, with the exception of his leadership score and his ballistic skill, he is the equal of a Centurion. And his initiative as well, although that often isn't particularly relevant on Terminators because a lot of them have unwieldy weapons. Sometimes it can matter. But I think that would do it.
Yeah.
You don't want to make it too flashy because otherwise you just sort of like, you don't want to create units that are overly powerful for reason. The main thing about the Devourers is they're Angron's Terminator bodyguards and they can't keep up with him.
Yeah. See, what you said, though, there, I think is actually quite something that would be really, really interesting. Imagine they were that brilliant. Imagine they were unbelievably OP. But because they never get up to meet him in a fight, you never get to see them rumble. Imagine they were, that's actually quite an interesting concept, that they are that brilliant.
If I remember rightly, Angron gives a buff to World Eaters which are close by to him, although don't quote me on that. So if he's running off, then they're going to lose out on that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it could then also give players the interesting option of like, well, actually, I'm going to try play Angron sensibly, and he's going to stick with his bodyguard. Let's see what happens.
That's actually not a bad idea. Imagine a rule. Imagine a special rule where Angron could only leave the unit if he rolls a certain amount on 2 dice. It's a strange thing to think about. I'm spitballing here, but imagine this idea that someone who wishes to play him, differently, shall we say, to the normal Angron of he's halfway up the field by the time you've hit turn 1. And this idea is, he has to stay with them, but almost like the rage is building on him and telling him to try and break away, but almost like the bodyguard are trying to control him, like the librarians used to do when they would put him to sleep in that story. So he has to roll maybe under his leadership, or at least double under his leadership or something like that. And if he doesn't, he has to stick with the unit. So he has to sacrifice part of his movement and things like that. And that can, it's something to think about. That would be quite interesting because it would be restrictive. But when he got in,
I think given the move rates and
there would be damage.
You would want him zooming off straight away. Otherwise, it's given the sort of way that most Heresy games tend to play out in terms of like the board layout. There's not a huge amount of difference between sides, and there's only 2 inches move difference, maybe 6 inches difference, or 8 inches difference if Angron's running, but it's not a huge difference between the two. If you impose tests on them, then it would definitely diminish the effect. And in the stories, Angron, he'll kind of like get deployed, they'll like have a tactical waffle, they'll line up for battle, and then he'll just run off. And he literally, the moment battle is joined, he gives into the nails and he just goes, does his own thing. So yeah, that's how I'd imagine those. But yeah, definitely a fun unit.
Yeah.
And quickly, just to deal with the models-wise, I think this will be pretty straightforward. Just use the Cataphractii miniatures. The only thing you'll be looking for is perhaps some offhand power axes or chain power axes, which you could kit bash.
I mean, there is the offhand chain axes you get from the Red Butchers, so you could use the hands from them. That would probably work quite nicely. Because I don't think, from the way they're described in the narrative, they're not as ornate as the Red Butchers armor-wise. So I don't see them having all that, that Red Butcher panoply. I would see them pretty much standard Cataphractii in a way, which is a great thing for kit bashing, but also kind of a poor thing because technically the insane, crazy people that are strapped into their armor have better.
Well, it's just different looking kit, isn't it?
Or at least nicer kit than you do. It's quite nicer, though. I have to admit, I do like the.
That would be quite fun to kit bash between. You could swap parts between the two kits to create the effect as well. But essentially, you don't. They wouldn't want their own models, or they don't need their own models. It's a simple kit bash conversion idea, isn't it?
Oh yeah. All they need is the rules. So they're definitely one that you could get a PDF for the exemplary battles out.
So they go, the Devourers, the first of our what-if units, or the first of our units that could be added to the Heresy. So shall we move on to the second then? So the second are... Well, this is a bit more of a loose concept, and it is, and we'll get to that when we get into the rules, but the second unit is Iron Hands Revenants. So I should probably explain what I mean by Iron Hands Revenants, if I can say it right. So the Iron Hands, after the Battle of Isstvan V, the Drop Site Massacre, found themselves in a bit of a tricky spot, didn't they? They were short on resources and personnel, and also extremely angry and wanting to take vengeance for the death of Ferrus. At least those that stayed loyal, of course. And they did the thing, didn't they, where they opened the naughty box.
Yeah. Ferrus, it's basically almost like a child, with their parent telling them, do not touch what's put in here. I have put it in there for a reason. It is not for you.
Yeah.
And
or at least some of them.
And they crack it open.
So this brings us into a bit of Iron Hands and sort of Heresy background, but what are called the Keys of Hell, and Hell is spelled H-E-L, so a single L unlike the two in reference to the mythical place of damnation. The Keys of Hell is, trying to think of how to describe it, it's forbidden technology, isn't it? It is technology that the Iron Hands recovered during the Great Crusade, and Ferrus Manus, being the tech marine or the technomancer of the Primarchs, he did seek out a lot of technology, didn't he? And some of it he found, he was like, Father wouldn't approve of me using this. We're going to lock this away. And it was locked away behind the Keys of Hell, wasn't it?
Surprisingly, though, he didn't destroy it. You would think that if they've got such techno-arcana, they'd be like, no, this is definitely something we can't touch, or even give it to the Emperor. Store it.
I mean, that's where he takes after the Emperor, though, didn't he? Because the Emperor was quite the one for saying, we will never use this technology again, and saying, well, I am keeping a little bit of it in my secret vault, just out of curiosity. Dark Angels with their, what was it called? The Exindio class automata, which was in effect a fragment of one of the Silica Animus put into a sort of robot body and set loose on the enemy. And the Keys of Hell was like this as well. It was all the technology that the Iron Hands recovered that Ferrus deemed to be too dangerous to use. One of the bits of technology they recovered was Necrotechnica, which we could broadly describe as systems and technologies that allowed the resurrection of dead humans. The certain enterprising or even desperate Iron Hands saw this as a way of maintaining their strength, their legionnaire strength, throughout the heresy by resurrecting slain brothers. And that's the idea of a revenant, isn't it? They are Iron Hands that are being brought back to life, slain Iron Hands brought back to life to continue fighting.
Yeah. Constantly took. It's not just that when they died once, the key resurrected them.
Even
those killed again can be resurrected. It's almost like the person who created that concept was a really big fan.
I mean, it's almost like it's a bit like the Dreadnought concept, but worse. You know, it's like there really is no rest for the Iron Hand Revenants. I mean, you know, makes people feel good about being drafted into the Medusan Immortals. And these guys, now the story I remember these from was, it was a titular story, The Keys of Hell. And it sort of talked about, well, some of these Iron Hands, didn't it? And it dealt with some of the tensions, even within their own legion, of resurrecting Marines and how uncomfortable some members were. So yes, that is our second unit, isn't it?
Yeah. It is quite an unbelievably interesting unit, you know, for such a small reference. You know, because when you think about it, if you weren't really paying attention to maybe, you know, listening or reading the story, and if it's, you know, with it being maybe even mentioned in one of the main books in the background, you know, The Keys of Hell, you wouldn't think it wasn't a big deal, but it definitely got expanded quite a bit. Because you mentioned the story there, The Keys of Hell. The one that always springs to my mind is the story Riven, which is about the Crusader host Iron Hand called Creus of the Cataran. He was an Iron Father, and he's taken out of prison in Kangbamaru by Rogel Dorn, and he's sent with a Templar to find basically Iron Hands, because Dorn has ordered, you know, everybody has to come back to Terra to protect it for the siege. And they decide to send a friendly face out to ask them nicely, rather than just literally this Imperial Fist rocking up with an Imperial decree.
And we all know how, you know, how people skills are not really high up on the Imperial Fist's resume.
No, they're great at walls, crap with people. And if I remember correctly in that story, they actually bump into a ship called the Thetis, and it only has like 2 guys on it. And they're like, where's everybody else? And they're like, oh, you know, we've suffered serious attrition and all this kind of stuff. But the ship is constantly full. Even for Marines in the suits, they're like, what's wrong with your environmental systems? And they're like, oh, they're shot. You know, we've been fighting Sons of Horus for, like, at this point, I think Ferrus has been dead for, 6-7 months? And they're like, we've been fighting them for ages. We've been taking a kicking. And they're like, well, the Sons of Horus are coming, and we're going to fight these guys, and, you know, because you're here, you're going to help us. And that's when, halfway through fighting these guys, the power of the ship drains, and all of a sudden, all these Iron Hands are basically activated. You know, they're woken up from the dead.
There's a reason why it was called. It's like,
kept in cold storage.
Yeah, it's like, well, actually, now you mention it, not all the environmental systems were shot. It's just this little room here. The reason it was called is because we didn't want them to go off. What do you mean go off? Rot?
I know. Because the Keys of Hell reanimate the body, but they don't stop the rot. Yeah, you have to keep them on. Another word. There's another reference to Universal Soldier. Yeah. You have to keep them on ice, or else. And some of them, if I remember correctly, some of them have some memories of their past lives, but they're not, let's just say, fully functioning humans.
Yeah, there's a bit in the. I think there's a bit in the Keys of Hell, because one of the protagonists ends up getting reanimated.
I think that might have been Creos, wasn't it?
And then it has a bit where it's sort of. I think I just forget if it's an internal monologue bit where basically sort of. Or it's either an internal monologue or he's speaking with another Marine, and he's basically saying how he remembers his past life and his memories, and he remembers how to fight and all of his skills as an Astartes, but there's something within him that's lost forever, and things no longer feel like the world feels sort of removed and distant to him. So yeah, I think I love the idea of Iron Hand remnants. I've got an Iron Hands army, but I think it's one of those things about the Iron Hands where it really leans into their sort of somewhat dark nature. They're kind of a loyalist legion, yes.
Yeah.
But certainly by the time immediately before the heresy, they developed a bit of a reputation for being very heartless and cold. Militia, Imperial Army, Solar Auxiliary didn't like fighting alongside them because they noticed that the Iron Hands would start using their formations as bait and as sacrifices, or tactical sacrifices, I should say, to avoid casualties in the Iron Hands. Because Ferrus and his commanders, the Legion, they're the valuable assets. Those are the things we've got to preserve here. So they became very cold and calculating, and it just sort of leans into that even more.
Yeah, and to think about that, after the heresy, they actually got a lot worse when it comes to their methodical nature. There's a lot of all these sort of side stories and things in the 40k equivalent of the Iron Hands, not interacting with their human auxiliary or even announcing their presence to them. They just appear. They what they want. They don't care about
they're a bit like I wouldn't exactly call them 40k Borg, but they're one of those Space Marine contingents that you wouldn't want to fight alongside, a bit like the Death Company from the Blood Angels. Or the Flesh Tearers, one of these, you definitely, So, that's a concept. So, in terms of how you would do this as a unit now, this is almost like a general rule that could be applied to a number of units.
You're thinking something like the inductee upgrade. It's a keyword that they change. And
yes, that's right. Yeah, so I think you'll exclude any of the Legion-specific units, perhaps, to avoid buffing them up a bit too much. So things like the Gorgons, the Immortals, and the Morlocks from the exemplar battles, and obviously things like Dreadnoughts, you'll probably say no on as well. But any of your standard squads and Terminators, you could say, you could make them Revenants. So my idea for this would be the Revenant unit. It would gain a natural feel no pain 5+ attribute, and that represents obviously their undead resilience. They would lose 2 points of initiative. So normally Space Marines are initiative 4, aren't they? I would knock them down to initiative 2 to reflect that they're no longer as quick and sharp as Space Marines are. Not even as quick as a standard human is.
Yeah. I would actually take it a step further, personally. I'd drop them down to 1. And I'd also take a point. Now, this might be a bit controversial, but I'd take a point of movement off them. I'd drop them down to initiative 1, but I'd give them a natural 4-up in them.
You see, the thing with Iron Hands, where you've got to be careful, is they have the natural Legion trait of resilience. So all weapons fire against them is a -1 strength. That synergizes really well with Feel No Pain. And so with Iron Hands, there's a whole bunch of weapons which can normally insta-death Marines, range weapons. But on Iron Hands, they can still take Feel No Pain saves against them. So I'd be very cautious about giving them an invulnerable save.
I just feel sorry for them. I'm just like, they're dead and they've had to come back to life. Give them the 4-up,
See, what I would also do is I'll give them fear, because they're creepy. Okay. They are genuinely creepy, these things. There's something not right about them. So I would give them fear, and I would also say that any army that has Revenants in it, if you buy an allied detachment, that allied detachment is automatically distrusted allies.
Yes, no, that would work quite well. Yeah, considering the story alone of the we're looking at the Iron Hands, like, really, seriously, they're not taking these things.
Any troops that had to fight alongside these would be like, I'm going to stay as far away from you as I can, and you are not of this world.
Now, here's an interesting thought I just had, and I suppose we can to and fro behind this one. Would you give them a proto-Necron reanimation protocol so that they can get back up, because the key constantly reanimates? So would you give them something akin to, you lie them on their side, at the end of the turn you roll a dice, and on a 6 it stands back up, because it's a single wound mini anyway.
You could do, couldn't you? Yeah.
So that they are constantly, you would, obviously you'd make them pay through the nose for this, but that idea of this undead legion is sort of the concept of what these Iron Hands are going for. The point is, you kill us, we'll get them up constantly. I think critical injuries, maybe you'd say something something like overstrength.
Well, actually, that's an interesting idea. What you could do there is you could say, not given the feel no pain rule, and instead give them Revenant 5+. And basically what happens is when a model with this rule loses its last wound, you lay it on its side. And then in the end phase, you roll a dice, and on a 5+, it gets back up with 1 wound. And then it doesn't matter what killed it. It's not quite like feel no pain.
That's a good way of thinking about it, because I doubt.
But the idea that they can get knocked down and then get back up again, that's an interesting way you could do them. And then in terms of modelling, well, you don't really need any specific models, just give them a load of creepy heads.
It would be. I think this would be a kit basher's dream, because in my mind, when I see these guys, I would buy one of those Green Stuff World tube makers. The thing where you can roll 2 plates against each other and it makes a green stuff tube. And you've probably seen it in some of the Black Shields I've did, Leaky, where I drill into the Marine, stick the tube in, and then run it around before the green stuff hardens into another part to extend the amount of sort of tubes and wires and stuff coming out of the body parts. They would, personally, in my mind, they would be riddled with those and bionics. Because they're constantly having to repair the body and the metal,
and of course,
the keys of
adding unnecessary tubes to a humanoid figure is always a bit disconcerting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit like the whole thing you said there about the Borg. Borg were creepy, but when they got, let's just say, their more tubes,
definitely,
scarier.
No, I like that.
Green and
so
tubes.
That would work well. So a bit more of a converting type of model there, isn't it? But otherwise, you could have relatively normal-looking models, but giving them heads and then painting them with pallid or slightly green skin tones, that would really give them the sort of flavour, wouldn't it? Yeah, like that. So that's number 2, the Iron Hand Revenants. And then what's the third one?
The third one is the Luperci.
The Luperci. So this is what happens when the Sons of Horus see the Gal Vorbak perform at Isfahan 5, isn't it? And start having chats with them afterwards. This actually happened, didn't it? Where after the battle, some of the Sons of Horus came over and had a chat with, I think was it Zaphon? Yeah, it was Zaphon, the chaplain. And it gave them ideas, I think. Coupled with, obviously, Horus's corruption and the influence of Erebus, they eventually say, right, let's give this possession thing a shot.
Mm-hmm. It was featured quite promptly in the story Vengeful Spirit, where the first Luperci was the body of the guy called Ger Garadon, who was killed fighting Hibu Khan.
Well remembered,
at Dwell. He ends up it's Tormageddon who possesses Ger Garadon's body. And it was Sergar Targost, if I remember correctly, who is the guy who is performing the
Targost. He's behind a lot of naughtiness, isn't he?
He is indeed. Well, in the Vengeful Spirit, remember, he gets his.
He does. Yeah, he gets his comeuppance. Yeah, he does, doesn't he?
Because it's when he's trying to make another Luperci out of the body of that Ultramarine that
who is
Garfield
it?
says to
That's Sergar Targost, isn't it? Who is it who, going off on a bit of a tangent here, which Sons of Horus officer gets knocked off at the end of Nemesis? That's it, Cedray. Yeah, Lucas Cedray. Yeah. I was trying to, was that Targos? No, you're right, Cedray, yeah. So they start experimenting with possession, inspired by, obviously, with the word bearers, I suppose where I said they got inspired by the Gal Vorbak, I guess that was their first exposure to a possessee.
Yeah, because the word bearers had really kept that on the core.
It was surprise.
That being said, they didn't last very long against Corax.
That's quite accurate to how it plays out on the tabletop game these days as well. The Gal Vorbak, they're very good against Marines. Anything that a Marine's got, they're good against those, but they quite evenly matched against the Custodians, but a Primarch will rip them to bits.
That's where they sustained a lot of casualties as well, wasn't it, actually, fighting Corax, because they went down to Ursh, I think, if I remember correctly.
So
it was like Argyle
there was
about 3 or 4 other guys by the end.
I know because I went through the First Heretic a few years back and made an exact chronology of the deaths of the Gal Vorbak. I think 11 Gal Vorbak survived the Battle of Isstvan 5. There were 43, I think, originally. Well, 43 came out of the Eye of Terror. They were originally 98. 100 were possessed. 98 survived the possession. 43 of those survived the Eye of Terror. And then 11 survived the Battle of Isstvan. And then I think only 3 of those survived the confrontation against Aquilon and his... Aquilon, Cithran, and there was one other custodian. It was 11 versus 3, wasn't it?
That was... I can't remember the name of the third one, but he's the one who took the vow of silence.
That's Cithran, I believe.
He throws his spear.
I think that was Cithran. I'm pretty sure that was Cithran, although if I got that wrong, I'm sure a sharp-eared listener will mention that in the comments for us. Now, they're not quite Gal Vorbak, aren't they? They're more like... I imagine these more like have been a copied version of the Vakrajal.
Yeah, they're almost like the Vakrajal. They're not as... I don't know sometimes the precise words to use. You know, let's try and use it in the analogy of 0 to 10. If the Gal Vorbak are a solid 10, I would say the Vakrajal are about a 6. I'd say the Luperci are technically about 5. Because it's almost like every time they're trying to... Because when you think about it, Sergar didn't really... He understood what Erebus told him, but he didn't really have the same, will with the chaos that Erebus did. So for all we know, when he was possessing these guys, he wasn't saying the incantation correctly. Or that actually gets him punished, remember. When he summons the one to possess Tormageddon, he gets his throat cut by Samus of the Ruinstorm because he's like, you only give us 16 sacrifices? How dare you? And he's like, we're the 16th Legion.
Yeah.
And he's like, that's not enough to bring one of us through. And he gets it was like Samus possesses his hand or something, or his arm, and makes him slice his own throat.
The 17th.
To get a...
Yeah.
What do you call it? Like a bit more of a possession to it, like a bit of a... that's worthy of
very
bringing
Samus move,
a Netherborn into the reality. Well, sure.
Remember that. Yeah, that was a great. I mean, the Samus's here moments. Some work better than others. Some of them it was a little bit like, come on. But that one I did quite like. I thought that was well played.
I honestly thought it came out of nowhere. I know this is a slight tangent, but that bit when they thought he was dead and they send the apothecary down the knight errant to, I think he used to be an armed warrior, the apothecary down to see if the Ultramarne's okay. And next minute, Sergar just sits up and goes, I'm Samos, and just tears the guy's throat out with his hand. And you're like, oh, they just lost their medic. Oh, this isn't going to go well.
But, so that's a bit of background to them out there. So these are the possessed sons of Horus and a sign of things to come. In terms of how to represent them on the tabletop, so obviously the Gal Vorbak is a unit. Now, in terms of actually playing the Gal Vorbak, there's nothing really to differentiate the Gal Vorbak of Isstvan 5 from later Gal Vorbak, certainly in games terms.
Quite a shame. I think they should. Maybe I'm just a bit of a picky person, but I personally think there should be a stat difference between the Gal Vorbak of the Serrated Sun, the Vakrajal Blue-Winds, the Luperci.
The obvious thing to do would be to have like a special rule where you can have one unit of Gal Vorbak as the Gal Vorbak, although I would say you'd have to limit it to a scenario. It would be a scenario-specific thing. But you could make them like the Anakatis Cull Blade Slaves that are controlled by Zardolex men, because they are weapon skill 6. Which is quite unusual.
Yeah, they always, every time I see those guys, you always get this sense that they're just big hulking drones. For them,
it is, and that's part of the thing with them.
Almost a bit
it's because those swords are so powerful and unnatural.
Yeah.
They're clearly a demon weapon of great power, are the Anakatis Cull Blades. So you could perhaps do that if you wanted to, particularly if you're doing a scenario to say either play Isstvan 5 and the Attack of the Gal Vorbak, or the showdown at the Wreck of the Rising Sun between Aquilon and his surviving men and Argyle Tal. Give them that extra point of weapon skill that'll make them something special.
Yeah.
I mean, would you make the Luperci or Luperci any different to a Vakrajal, a basic Galvorback? I mean, it might be quite difficult in terms of game terms.
I would try my best to make them very different, because I've always got the implication from the way my interpretation of reading the books was that the Galvorback were something special, because Raum and his possessed, or his demons, invaded these creatures, and it was somewhat symbiotic because they, understood and merged with the demon. When you get that short story where the guy is trying to make the Vakrayal, it's
that's right.
very forced and invasive.
Yeah, the original Galvorback they were supposed to be symbiotic. Well, they were symbiotic fusions of the demons and the Astartes, and they were, as rather eloquently observed by Lorgar in the first Heretic, 2 souls in one body. The later ones that came after that, it was much more a case of a demon taking control of the Space Marine's body. But yeah, again, that's quite a subtle nuance. I don't know if you can really play out in game terms. But I suppose we're thinking, what would we do with these to make them interesting? So is it a case of, we say that for the Luperci, the Sons of Horus get in effect a unit that's got the same stat line as the Galvorback in their army?
I would probably try and give them, if they're going to have the stats akin to the Galvorback, they would need a certain special Sons of Horus rule that gives them something a bit more of a, let's just say, they need to be very different compared to just taking a Galvorback. You know what I mean? Maybe something like, if Horus is on the field, they get an extra buff because they think they're chosen by their War Master, or something akin to that. Maybe, situational almost, that, if he, because when you think about it, the last time we really saw the Luperci was the book Wolf Time, where Lehman was fighting Horus, and they were running rampant, and a lot of them got killed. Now, I don't think we've actually seen them since then, so I would have to actually go back and
you could put something in to say, if you have an army which has Horus ascended as its warlord,
or Malaga.
That's true. Yeah. So, all right, 2 different ones. So with Horus ascended,
massacre,
I would say you can take them as non-compulsory troop options. Yeah. For Malaghurst, I would do it differently and allow him to take a unit of Luperci as a retinue squad.
Yes, I do like that. Yeah. Especially that makes a lot of sense, especially for Malaghurst.
Yeah. that could be quite fluffy, couldn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. I've actually thought of the best way to describe them. Just when I was thinking about that sense of invasiveness. Stargate.
I didn't actually. I've seen the film, which I really enjoyed. I thought the film Stargate was actually a really good sci-fi movie. I enjoyed that one.
Well, for the listeners, then the best way to describe them would be the Galvorback are the Tok'ra. The Tok'ra are a meld of the creature from Stargate and the human, who have sort of formed together to make a cohesive unit. Yeah. As you say, 2 souls in one body. Whereas the Galvo or the Vakrayal and the Luperci they just possess the body, take over the creature, and that's it. The host is subsumed. The person's effectively dead because the snake creature goes in and
you're kind of whereas the other one is a fusion. Yeah, that's a really good analogy. That yeah.
So for people who would maybe know Stargate, the Tok'ra and the Goa'uld are basically the difference between the Galvorback
and
the Vakrayal stroke Luperci.
Ooh.
Models,
well. I mean, obviously we've got the wonderful Galvorback models, which you could kit bash them a bit or convert them a bit to remove their word bearer insignia. So you could leave some of the scroll papers on, perhaps, as being summoning parchments or something.
Yeah.
Or if you're feeling particularly ambitious, you could cut the lot off along with the insignia. I mean, that's one option. The other is to use parts from the Greater Possessed from the 40k range.
That's what I was thinking, with generic plastic marines, sort of to show that they're not fully out of their armor yet, because the Luperci weren't as advanced, I would say, as the Galvorback. Those creatures, obviously, as you say, the melding. Maybe it's the melding that makes them bigger, taller, stronger, whereas these more invasive creatures are trying to break out of the skin.
There's loads of potential there, isn't there?
From a conversion point of view, there's a lot.
I mean, I think there's perhaps out of all ones we've talked about so far this episode, this is perhaps the strongest candidate for a model of its own.
That would be amazing, yeah. If Forge World, there was, I think, one piece of artwork ever done for them for the book Wolf Time. So if someone took that original, got Neil Roberts' say, original computer render, and then zoomed in to where we see Lupikai, they could then sort of get a breakdown of how they...
Which book was that again?
Wolf Time. I think it was Wolf Time, yeah. The guy in the Wolf Time cover, he's in the background of Horus and Lehman, having at each other. And he's got the Chthonian top knot, and he's in his burning, his black armor is on fire, because the whole thing of the Lupikai is the flames are breaking out, almost semi-Legion of the Dandy. But he's got the crab claw of the greater possessed guy, and it's in the background swinging at a Wolfguard Terminator.
Oh, yeah, just looking at a picture of it now, yeah.
You could do something like that.
Yeah, they could actually... There's an opportunity there to do a general possessed Legionnaire, isn't there? That could have uses outside of just the Sons of Horus. Because there were possessed Marines on quite a lot of the traitor forces, weren't they, as the heresy moved onwards. So there were all sorts of things, weren't there?
End, definitely.
So converting kit bashing using greater possessed, existing Gal Vorbak, or maybe even a new model. And talking about that nicely brings us on to the final unit for this episode, which is, loyalist but corrupted all at the same time. And this is the Raptors of the Raven Guard of the 19th Legion. So this is quite interesting, having just talked about demon-possessed traitors in the form of the Lupikai, Gal Vorbak, and the Bakrajal. These guys is what happens when some loyalists try to crash create Astartes and the Alpha Legion come along and go, Hydra Dominatus.
Fantastic story. I do quite like the book Deliverance Lost, where after Corax gets the knowledge from the Vault of Terra, he starts sifting through and making his basically perfect Space Marines. And, they've just survived the Drop Site Massacre. They're finally getting back on their feet. That's the Alpha Legion.
And they infiltrate. How do they do this? If I remember rightly, they managed to successfully adopt the identity of some Marines who were killed at Isfahan 5, some Raven Guard. Yeah,
it's quite clever, isn't it? Mind, I think, using a
and it's very subtly done, because they managed to get past all. They convince the Raven Guard back on Terra, the survivors, that they are indeed survivors as well, and they managed to infiltrate Corax's reconstruction group, don't they?
Yeah. If I remember correctly, they actually also remove a gene seed, and they put a Raven Guard one in, just in case they need to fool a genetic scanner.
It is.
It's very
convincing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, spoiler or not, one of the senior commanders of the Raven Guard, remember, turned out to be one of them. And obviously he's in constant chats with the Primarch. This isn't just some random legionary who... when running away in the Battle of Isfahan, he took a bullet in the back and everybody thought he was dead, but then he arrives a day later and they're like, oh, he's just some legionary. He's not high ranked. No, this guy was high up.
Yeah.
And he had
he was like a trusted, he was like a ranking officer, wasn't he?
He was basically, he was, for all intents and purposes, using heresy game trait. Yeah, there were 7 of them, I believe, from all different ranks and statuses. I think there was like a couple of legionaries, the Lord Commander, and about 2
That's right, yeah. And they infiltrate the operation, and they have a little vial of demonic spore, don't they?
Oh yes, the blood. Yeah, it's described by that Dark Mechanicum guy to Omegan, is they managed to refine demonic blood, and they're going to use it to poison the gene vault. He's quite taken aback by that, Granted, there's something seriously wrong when
bulking at your methods.
At you going,
you've crossed the line.
Exactly. But in doing so, demonic blood actually taints the second crop of raptors, because the first 500 turn out to be perfect. Basically, better than Inducti. For all intents and purposes, I would consider the Raven Guard raptors to be Inducti. But they're better than Inducti. They're not just flashed Inductation. These guys were the best of the best. And then second 500 were the best of what's left, because of what happened to them. And that coin phrase, the rough and the smooth.
Yeah, which is a great euphemism, isn't it? So the rough are what happens when you have something akin to loyalist Gal Vorbak, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Tentacles.
Spikes.
Yeah.
They start growing teeth out of extra places.
They've almost got the body
just, claws.
corruption of the demons, but they are still fully in control, loyal Space Marines, aren't they?
Oh yeah, at this point in time, yes, they're completely compos mentis. Like they know what they are and they're ready to fight. There's even, if I remember correctly, there's a guy in the main sort of POV character called Navar Hef. There's a guy in his squad who ends up mutating so much. He's basically so big that he has to have custom Mark 6 armor made for him. He can no longer wear a helmet.
Yeah.
His hand is so big he can't actually grip a bolt gun. But they end up giving him some sort of cross between multi-melta and a melt.
Just because that's a weapon he can easily carry.
The heavy support guy. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think in the story Ravenlord, that weapon takes damage. I think it gets a bolt round, so you can't use it. So he just resorts to his hands,
which works the same.
So massive talons. For all intents and purposes, lightning claws, you might well say.
So the Rough are these massive, brutish, physically corrupt type Astartes, similar in form and stature to a possessed Space Marine of Chaos, while still being a loyal Space Marine, loyal to the Imperium Space Marine. But then you've got the Smooth. So describe the Smooth.
The Smooth are basically the Primaris Marines before Primaris existed. They were described, in the book, they're described as being basically perfect. They describe a story where they take a 10-year-old, it was an 8 or a 10-year-old boy, and they implant him with this, the gene seed of the Raptors is basically the perfect iteration of Raven Guard, right? And within the span of a couple of days, he's grown from being an 8-year-old boy to the size of a full-scale Space Marine. And not only does he have the physique he has without the need for flash indoctrination. Perfect. One of them, there's a sparring story. He takes a veteran, beats him up.
They're like inductee, but even better. So it's almost like boiling the bag veterans, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
So were these the ones that Corax created before our Alpha Boy slipped in the demon blood?
Yeah, he would take them in batches of 100. And he got 5 batches done out of the 1,000 kids or 2 kids they had at Ravendelve, which is near the Fortress Monastery. And because he was worried about going too quickly and, in a sense, not having enough material, because at this point in time, remember, down on tanks and they didn't, this is before the Imperial.
So they were short on equipment,
to give them their Mark 6. Exactly. And there's no point in making 1,000 if you haven't got the kit to put them in.
So those are like paradigms of what Space Marines could have been. So, in terms of what these would look like in game then, so there's 2 distinct flavours of Raptors, aren't there? 2 separate units. So, shall I start with the Rough? Well, the Rough basically, right, they're going to be like the same sort of profile as a Gal Vorbak, aren't they?
I would say yes, if not slightly less. I would describe them as, I don't know, what would be the cross between...
Well, that is a Gal Vorbak, really.
Veteran and a Gal Vorbak. Okay, well, I'll rephrase that, a Vakra Yal and a company veteran, because they're not exactly the creme de la creme of their mutations are a bit unforeseeable.
Yeah, perhaps these are a bit more of an oddity in terms of how they make your army work. I guess the obvious thing is you have to give them the corrupted subtype rule, but they're not traitors. Yeah. So that's one thing. So that would automatically grant them fear as well, which sounds about right. They are pretty terrifying, aren't they?
Yeah,
there's a definite army building thing here, which is a bit like our Revenants from earlier. If you have a Raven Guard force that includes... Actually, I would be strict with these. I would say any Raven Guard army that has Rough Raptors cannot have an ally.
Ooh, that
none whatsoever.
No ally whatsoever.
There are rights of war which impose that restriction on forces. So, from the fluff point of view, if you think about the Imperial mindset, I can't imagine any Imperial commander going anywhere near a force that contains these things. Whatever assurances the Raven Guard Praetor gives them, or even Corax.
He may look terrible, but he's...
imagine what the custodians would say. They'd say, abomination!
Well, they do. Sure, there is custodians with Corax when he makes these things, but because they saw it from the very start and they understood, they basically tell him, you can either put them away in the Ravenspire, or you can send them out to glorious battle in suicide missions.
But you're not letting them scuttle around the palace.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's like, what is that? And why is it climbing?
So yeah, that'd be what I'd say. I'd give them corrupted, but not with traitor, and say a Raven Guard army that has them cannot have any allies.
Well, give me your interpretation of the smooth before I give my version.
Smooth is a lot harder to do because it sounds a lot like a company veteran, maybe with even a point of extra ballistic skill. So they're kind of almost at the level of a Centurion. But
they're not as cool as the
I don't know, maybe that, and perhaps just give them a limitation on how many you can take. So Heresy doesn't normally do this in army building. It doesn't normally say you can only take one of something. So I don't know if you would do that really, because it's not in character with the game. Apart from, you could actually do it. No, you could do it. What you could do is you could have the squad, but make it unique. So if you gave it a unique special rule, it would limit you to one choice in the army. And that could be used to represent their rarity.
Quite true, considering there was only a couple of hundred of them made, just under 1,000. And at that point in time, Heresy, even the Raven Guard, though they were badly massacred, they still had about 4,000 troopers. That's a drop in the ocean compared to what they have.
Yeah, you could argue it, and also given what we're saying is this is like a supermarine, so their stats are superlative. Their stat line is, I'm just trying to think of the nearest comparison. The only other unit that I think has got the same stat line are the Justarian Terminators. So that's how good these guys are, and the Justarian are the best.
Okay, no, well that's fair enough. I would take a bit of an interesting, different approach to them. I would go narratively, and in the narrative, Corax has commanded that the rough have to run with the smooth because they're all raptors and he wants everybody to run together. So I would make them an elite choice, not to one, keyword unique, but I would have you allow, you could kit bash and convert them however you see fit, but their rules and their buffs come from a chart, just like Fabius Bile's New Men from 3rd edition Chaos. 40k. You roll a d6. On a 1 to 2, it's smooth. On a 3 to 4, it's rough and smooth, and you get this +1 ballistic skill, +1 strength, maybe feel no pain 6 up because they're mutated. But if you roll a 5 or a 6, it's pure rough.
More physical buffs.
They're breaking down. Oh yeah, but in the down, some of them, because of the mutations, actually driving them a bit strange. So I would have something, unstable is perfect. That's a perfect word for it. I would have it that after every combat, not just every turn, every combat, because every turn's unfair if they don't get into combat. After every combat, you have to roll a dice for everybody.
Oh, they're dead.
On a 1, they're dead. When they turn, they have to be executed because they're fully, that's when they actually go full feral. There's no more Space Marine anymore. That's why Corax has to execute them all at the end of the Heresy.
Yeah, so they're a bit like
and then they were gone.
A bit like the Blood Angels, who
so he literally put them out of his misery.
Starts from the Black Rage, unless you're called what's his name?
Yes, the Black Rage, yes, or Astarath.
Oh, all those actually.
Oh no, Lamartes.
Yeah. All those are well, they're all Blood Angels who had exceptional resilience. Oh, was I thinking of Tycho?
Well, he fell.
Yeah, didn't he? Yeah, but Lamartes is probably a good example because he somehow endured as a member of the Death Company, didn't he? Yeah. Okay. So that's an interesting way of doing it, actually, the randomness. So with that, I guess you need to be careful to make sure all the different levels of outcome are equal in terms of their value.
Oh, yeah.
Or you want to think of it as being, you don't know if you're going to get a unit that's really skillful, like a high skill unit, so high weapon skill, high ballistic skill, or if you're going to get a melee juggernaut. Yeah. So as long as that was balanced.
It is quite an interesting way of working on it because when you think about it, dependent on the era of Heresy, some of these roughs and smooths are very cohesive, very brilliant. And then on the flip of a coin, half of them have went feral,
Yeah, that's an interesting way to do it. And also it would make them more than just Loyalist version or a Raven Guard version of the Gal Vorbak, wouldn't it? They'd give them a distinct flavour, yeah. The thing with call it the instability rule. Quite an interesting idea how you did it. You could do it, like the way you did it, that's quite a destructive way for them, or you could make them like corrupted units in that if you lose a melee, if you fail a morale check, in melee, then you suffer wounds instead of running away. So you could do that.
And personally, I don't think they deserve, it's not that they don't deserve a model. I think
You could do them as either something weird and wonderful, which for loyalists could be quite intriguing with, like corrupted bits. Or you could just do them as, like, play them dead straight as normal looking Marines if you're thinking, well, they're going to be very smooth. But maybe just give them a bit of a tweak.
Yeah.
But definitely, yeah, you're right. That's either a unit that's dead easy to do if you're playing them as smooth in effect, or it's a kit bashing opportunity if you're wanting to bring in some tentacles and claws. Excellent. Fantastic. Well, there you go. 4 units that exist in the Heresy background but don't have in-game rules or models yet. I thought that was pretty good.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's just, there's plenty more out there.
We do. We may do. There is a list, isn't there?
Talk about a few more next time.
At least 10, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Excellent.
At least 10.
Good. Well, I hope you have all enjoyed listening to this episode of Legion of Cheese. As always, please do share your thoughts and observations in the comments section. Always interested to hear those. I'd just like to say thank you very much, Jay, for coming on as a guest again and sharing all this. I really enjoyed this discussion. We've covered all sorts of interesting ideas, and as well as coming up with the ideas for the unit rules, it's always fun talking about the background of where these guys and things have been in the story as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you.
Not a problem. I'll just say one thing. If when you were saying there about people putting things in the comments, if anybody can think of units that don't exist yet in rules but do have lore, stick them in the comments. I want to see if we get any matches to the ones we haven't mentioned yet.
So yeah, please do share those ideas.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, again, thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Legion of Cheese, and we will speak to you again soon. Goodbye.
Thanks, Bye-bye.